happy to welcome to our studios here Dr. Robert Lewis, who is a former education minister and somebody we'll find out so much more about his contribution to St. Lucian society. Dr. Lewis, first of all, welcome to Calabash TV.
Well, thank you, Bernard, and it's always a pleasure having people like you interview me, because I see you as my generation, and probably we start from the same point in terms of where our awareness of St. Lucianness begins.
And like you, I think you mentioned that you were in high school when you celebrated independence, and we want to couch this into our independence project, which is looking at St. Lucia 43 years on since independence, and looking forward to our 50th and 60th anniversary, like Jamaica, Trinidad, and so on, celebrating and see where we ought to be as a nation, and whether there's a need for course correction, or what we're doing is working so far so good that we should keep it that way. But first, when I was reading up on you last night, I noticed there's a Kennedy in there.
Yeah. Where that came from?
Yeah, where that came from. Was something influenced by American politics, or there was probably another story to it?
I'm almost certain it was influenced by American politics, because we're talking about 1965. I'm born in 1965, right. May 20th, 1965. And I imagine my mother at the time would have been a big fan of Robert Kennedy. And of course, John F. Kennedy was a president, you know. And so the whole thing would have been, probably somebody say, give him the name Robert Kennedy Lewis. And even when I went to school, I mean, I got an American scholarship, a USAID scholarship, under the Presidential Award. And that was the question, one of the first questions asked when I got to Washington. I suspect you were named because of Robert Kennedy, the former Attorney General. And yes, and so much so I visited I think it's the FBI headquarters, and they told me, oh, you can go in because for your name's sake. I mean, so, you know, you can go in and see the place because it's a Robert Kennedy on my ID card.
Obviously, your mom wasn't into music, or the Beatles would have influenced that.
I'm sure she was into music, but I'm sure it's the politics of the United States that would have influenced the name. Yeah.
Now, even at that time, and now we were discussing before we started the discussion in independence, and I think you said that you were in high school when St. Lucia gained independence. At the time, and you got into politics, so you got to understand exactly how government works and what independence is supposed to be. Now that we're getting ready to celebrate our 43rd anniversary, what are your thoughts on where we've been as a country and where we're going? Do you think that we're on the right track, or there's need for some kind of course correction?
Of course. First of all, I must tell you, I believe that we've achieved tremendous stuff in these last 42 years as a small island state with few resources. As you know, our biggest resource is our people. And if you have that resource, then you can actually clear a number of things, because the human resource in this country is very extensive, and we've done very well in terms of that resource by educating that resource to a certain level. Now, I come into this picture having come into politics from education. So I see St. Lucia making a lot of strides in these 42 and a half years, because we're talking now close to 43 years. I see St. Lucia really making a lot of strides, because when you look at where our education system was, let's say, in 1979. In 1979, just about, I never double-checked that figure, but from what I know, in 1979, we probably would have had maybe close to universal primary education. Close, not universal primary education. We still had children in some parts of our country who were not able to go to school. And of course, you could imagine 79, if you remember 1980, Hurricane Allen, and the devastation it caused. And a lot of students now, their education had been cut in half with the school system, shift system, sorry. Now, if we come in about 30%, if I am given a good number, probably 40% could have gone to high school. Up to 1979, how many secondary schools did we have to take students from the primary level into a secondary education? It's probably, we had St. Joseph's Convent, St. Mary's College, we had View Fort. I'm counting the government schools first, View Fort, secondary. And then we can talk about the SD Academy was there because the Adventist Church had its school. And then we're talking about, we had a number of junior secondary schools, from Coram Secondary, Junior Secondary, Antwerp Junior Secondary, Dennery Junior Secondary, and Miku Junior Secondary. I think Sufra may have been also, I'm not too sure. Could have been. But just about 30% of our students could go on. And everybody was saying sometimes that the students failed. but they were not necessarily failing. A lot of our students, a lot of us didn't fail. We were just not, we just didn't have an opportunity to go into secondary school because the country didn't have the placement. And so coming into that, I was, as you said, I was in high school in '79, and then I left school and I started teaching. And amazingly, I started teaching common entrance. And so now you're preparing children to go on to secondary school, and you see exactly what the problem is. I saw children crying at Cicero Combine, where I taught first. And by the time I started teaching in 1984 at Cicero Combine, I mean, probably the percentage rose to about 40%, let's say. But even then, you can see the number of students, their dreams are being shattered, and they don't have places to further education, because at age 12, 13, in those years, we're still at the standard 6. So students just stayed in school until they were age 15, because up to now, we have, part of our legislation is that you ought to be in school until age 15. After that, of course, you can choose to leave. And many of our young people, of course, they stayed in school, and then they went on to do vocational work or whatever the country offered them in those years. So there's so much to say, but I think my perspective, and of course, doesn't mean my perspective is the only right perspective, but I'm looking at it from an education lens. So I'm sure that I can see where I was as a teacher up to about 1989. We probably just could handle about 45% of our students going to secondary school. So in the last 32 years, we've even increased that now. People are beginning to complain. We have too many secondary school places because, so rightly so, not rightly so, we have a lot of places, even in the primary schools, our primary schools are not 100% capacity because we have spaces.
Right.
And you realize that we begin to talk about moving early childhood into some of these spaces, which is a good idea. Well, it doesn't matter who comes up with the idea. I think it's a good idea that even during my tenure as minister, I could see that we needed to use some of these spaces to take in children between the age of 0 to 3, because a lot of persons cannot give their children the early childhood education that's needed. But I'm sure I'm sure you have more questions to ask me. But for me, it was we've done tremendously in terms of education. And you go back and you look at, if you think about it, if you look throughout the institutions in the Caribbean or outside in the rest of the world, you'll find St. Lucians in almost every institution making their contribution to a global society. And I think all our leaders talked about it. Sir John, George Odlum, Kenny Anthony, all our leaders, Philip J. Pierre, Stevenson King, they've talked about it in terms of it's not just a local contribution you'll make, you'll go on to make contribution globally. And whether it's at the IMF or the World Bank or in some charity, you can see St. Lucians have moved on and they're not just prepared for a local sector.
So we ought to be educating people for the wider world as opposed to just coming back. Because recently I had a discussion with somebody and saying, but most of the St. Lucians who go overseas don't come back. And I'm saying, come back to what?
Well, yeah, you're right. Because, I mean, I think it is always good to have your people serving your country, but let's be realistic. I mean, you will never be able to absorb all the people. I mean, I have taught so many young men at St. Mary's and so many young women at the primary level who I know are at some university, at some research center. They're doing wonderful things, but we don't have time. We don't know, so we were not able, and sometimes it's true. When they come home, they come in a very obscure way, and we're not aware what they're doing. But it is when somebody gets something on the news, like I heard about a few months ago when we had this doctor who had gone to school at Castro's conference, but I can't remember his name, and he was featured as one of the guys handling the whole COVID issue. So I think there is a lot of research to be done. That's the problem. There's a lot of research to be done because we don't keep records well.
It's true. There are so many solutions out there, and part of the thing is to find those solutions and have them engage, because they too have thoughts and ideas that they want to share on developing the country as well. But yes, it's true, Doc. We've had a lot of success in terms of education, but the areas that we haven't made such progress in, even now, and I want to ask you, because recently it's Arthur Lewis held its graduation, and normally during that time, we hear the announcement of island scholarships and so on.
Right.
For the past couple of years, it was mentioned this year. I don't think it was mentioned last year. Probably it was probably 1 or 2. But I wanted to ask you, is it a conversation that you were having as a minister as well in terms of the number of island scholars that we're giving? St. Lucia gives from 79, we were giving 1. up to recently, I think sometime we gave 2, but it's been 1. Do you think that the youth of St. Lucia, especially those our best and brightest, don't deserve a little more investment from their government into their education?
Yeah, very good question, quite honestly. That has me just thinking about it because it's a discussion we had when Dr. Anthony was Prime Minister and I served as Minister. And technically, there had been 2 island scholars. And it would have been the top 2 students on merit based on, at the time, was, well, it's always based on the A-level results, the GCE A-level. As well now, it's based on the KIP, the CXC KIP. I agree with you, but if you look at 79, and that's where you have to go back. If you look at up to 79, St. Lucia was fortunate to receive a number of scholarships from a lot of agencies. For example, we started taking, I think, the Cuban scholarships around 1979, 1980 on the St. Lucia Labour Party. But we were still having CEDA, the Canadian International Development Agency. We were having USAID. We had the Commonwealth, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, all these countries were offering a scholarship. So while Sir Arthur was giving, well, a country, because for a small country, you wanted to say, you give the top 2 best performers your island scholarship. But that didn't mean that these were the only ones getting. But as we've gone on in the last 42 years, these scholarships are kind of dried up in that most countries now begin to think, well, you realize they're putting us as middle-income countries, and they figure, well, you can do better. The scholarships dwindle. We still have a number of scholarships that are available. I always went to school on scholarship in the sense that, if you think about it, I went in 89 on the USAID Presidential Award, and 12 St. Lucians in that year, and on years before, so I just want to go back. 1985 was the time when this scholarship actually started under President Reagan. And it had started because of the Grenadian issue, when the United States, well, it's invade Grenada with all the ideas that they were rescuing American students. But really it was. We really know what the issue was. So President Reagan at the time agreed to give 50 scholarships a year to the Eastern Caribbean. And from 1985 right through until probably the mid-1990s, that scholarship scheme was there. And I came under 89. So I'm just saying, St. Lucia got 12 in my year. And there were other schemes that were giving scholarships. Plus, you had a number of scholarships, and a lot of St. Lucians could have gone to UWI, especially Caville, because Caville campus of the University of the West Indies was really built to serve the Eastern Caribbean. I mean, it looks like the Bajans have control of it, but at the time, it was built to serve the Eastern Caribbean. So there were a lot of scholarships, and money was flowing. But as I said, as we get into more independent as a country, these scholarships, we don't hear much about it. And St. Lucian students still get a lot of scholarships, but some of them are not advertised properly, quite honestly. We're doing a bad job. So I still see opportunities. Some of them are dwindled. But you're right. But I am not going to say maybe we should give more, because the country, the resources, when you give a scholarship, you actually giving that island scholar everything. They actually, and it's all right on meritocracy. It's a meritocracy on merit. You giving them tuition, you're giving them housing, you're giving them whatever. And remember, St. Lucia, the students could have gone, they can go on to do any field of study. While you realize also, in the 80s, the country came to a point where we began giving, I think we still give 25 what you call economic cost awards to UWI. So that means the students, the fee the parent will pay now is reduced by almost half or more. And so that is still in place. And then it was under Sir John that began, and the idea was always that the economic cost would mean we didn't want St. Lucian students. We could not give economic cost to those doing medicine or law, because we felt these areas had become oversubscribed at some point, especially law, if you look. So we're doing things the same way but different, the same way but in different measure. So I think education has always been a thrust for any St. Lucian government. And that's the beauty about it. We fight sometimes, we think we fight in the politics. That's the nature of politics. But every government still has a focus on educating St. Lucian masses. So I think in certain years, like if St. Lucia celebrated 25th anniversary, the government, they have taken a decision to give 4. If I remember our cabinet, when I served, there was a year we actually gave 3 or 4 for a particular reason. I don't recall what that particular reason was, but there are a lot of people in the cabinet who had the same sentiments that you are sharing there. And it wasn't only supposed to be just for those doing GCE levels. And that was the issue. And Dr. Anthony was always worried that it was looking like it was only those who had gone to the A-level division who were getting the scholarships. And so there was always case for those doing whether it's technical or that. In fact, Teachers College itself always had a scholarship, but that went away also because, again, sometimes it just fell off the way. Somebody did not really continue funding it. We didn't have, as you say, I'm looking for a word, where you have for those who are going to stand behind it and say, we must have this scholarship every year. There must be those who support certain initiatives for these initiatives to thrive and to continue to grow.
I'm hoping a little bit of focus on the youth economy, that becomes part of it, because that's how you develop your youth as well. And I know, we say that the country doesn't have resources and so on, but I think we need to have the political will to find the resources, because Taiwan can give us 21. Cuba,
I was just about telling you.
Cuba is giving us, and they have tremendous resource constraints.
But you said something I forgot to mention. I didn't really, to be fair, I didn't really follow SAFA. I knew SAFA had graduation because my cousin Wanda Semi Francis, his son graduated, but I never followed. But by right, the Minister for Education, whoever that is, and it's Sean I'm talking about, I'm not talking about him, whoever that is should really announce at the graduation of SAFA what the island.
That's what is normally announced as well.
It is general. And it would generally be the year before, because you can't really well, no, that's not true. Well, yes, because the graduation general comes in December. And so the students would have written the exams June, July, August. But I suspect this year, with the whole COVID issue, and we write KIP. So some of these exams, sometimes the results may not have been available. So or the candidates for that may not have been selected just yet.
But there ought to be some kind of a policy saying that either one of two things, that the government will address it and look to increase it, because, like you said, the resources are dwindling internationally, and we have to look inward or find some kind of creative ways of finding funds for St. Lucian youth. Now that we talk about the youth economy, as you mentioned UWI a while ago, I just want to ask you quickly before I move on to the other things. The 5th campus has gone to Antigua. Did we miss an opportunity, or was it something that we weighed and we thought probably it's not in our best interest?
You know, I mean, I was minister at the time when this whole discussion was going on. Antigua has always been pushing for that 5th campus. Clearly, there had been a time when, and even now, we always would have been maybe the choice, the obvious choice of 5th campus. Because if you look at St. Lucia in terms of its development, in terms of population size, in terms of where it's located in the OECS, we're actually in the heart of the OECS. So if you wanted to bring people of the OECS from Antigua, well, not Antigua, St. Kitts a little higher, down for the islands, and from Grenada up and across from Barbados, I doubt very much too many Bajans would come anyway. I'm not suggesting they won't. But I think we were in line for it. I don't know what happened at the exact moment when these discussions were finalized. I have never asked. I actually wanted to have a discussion with my successor, Dr. Gail Rubigat, because we're friends. We were supposed to have a discussion last week, Wednesday, but we never met because for some domestic reasons. But it's a good question. So I wanted to ask her what really happened, because a lot of people, and I think it may be a good thing to ask her if you somehow have a discussion with her. Because I think the country needs to know, because the country puts its money in UWI also, because St. Lucia does make a contribution to the University of the West Indies, because that's our responsibility under the when this university was established, that all the countries of the Caribbean and in a particular formula would make a contribution. But that also comes on with, makes me want to clear my mind on the open campus issue. The government of St. Lucia, whether lots of St. Lucians believe it or not, we're spending lots of money paying for the open campus. Now, I'm not just saying that, I'm not supposing that we have paid everything we need to pay, because there's a difference in you owing UWI and having paid them. So, but there is a mechanism where open campus, which allows any number of St. Lucians to access higher education through the open campus. The government of St. Lucia is supposed to pay for that. So I don't know all the points in the last 5 years, but you're right. I think we were one of the contenders. And the only thing I'll say, based on what I knew from my friend who was then Minister for Education in Antigua, Michael Brown. Michael Brown was always one, if you did not stay with him, he's a guy who was pushing all the time. So he already had a school that the Chinese had built in Antigua, and I think he made it available to UWI as the campus, as the home of that campus. So maybe, and they had some ultimatum. I'm sure they had some issues they probably pushed, but probably never pushed it, because I must tell you, and I want to be frank here, I am not sure. I'm sure that Dr. Gail Regoban, is an educator, and she's someone who has been educated properly. But I'm not sure that the former Prime Minister, I'll be quite honest with you, I'm not sure the former Prime Minister had his gaze on the education of the young people in that regard. I'll be quite honest with you. And I'm very critical of him because, in my view, he was the least prepared person to serve as Prime Minister, especially in the 21st century. You can't have anybody serving as your leader who doesn't have a vision for education. You can say what you want about John Comden. Say what you want about him. He probably didn't get everything done, but he started the ball rolling, and everybody behind him pushed it a little further. And I want to say that they were always thinking about, how do you make education the leveler for everybody, because it is the great leveler. Whether you think about it, Sir Arthur said, the cure for poverty is knowledge. And the more we give our young people a chance to stay within walls of education, the better and our chances are of surviving as a young country.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this first discussion for the new year with you, because education is, like you mentioned, the great leveler. It is what will release us, make us more independent. Anybody who's educated can find a way. They can solve issues. They can, come up with ideas. They can discuss things and look at things in a critical way. And I know, even I'm sure with you as minister, that there was always a struggle for resources. You mentioned it a couple of times that there was always resource constraints, and it is a feeling that that the governments don't invest enough of their resources in education, which is what can resolve so many of our issues, the poverty issue that we're talking about, youth unemployment, crime, even health issues and so on. If people are educated, they can have a different look at health and so on. And so it's a conversation I think we ought to have. Even if when we discuss the youth economy, I watched the launch of the youth economy. I didn't see the Ministry of Education focusing front and center. Even when there are COVID management, we didn't have education, and to me, education is the most important thing. Recently, I heard somebody saying that part of the issue is education. People don't understand mask, vaccination, and those kind of things. So that's why I wanted to have you there as somebody who's been involved in it.
I want to make sure I clear something that I said just now, and to tap onto what you're saying. And my criticism, right, about the whole idea of the former Prime Minister. The thing is, if you thought about where, as you said, the debate was going with the COVID issue, education is the critical thing. The only way you could have kept children, one of the only ways you could have kept children into education was through mobile devices, through the internet, have a platform that does that. And the government did nothing really, criticizing the Labour Party that had come up with a plan, even if you think there is room for improvement, a plan to have the one laptop per child. That you could tweak it and make it better, because one of the things, Bernard, for anybody to do is come into government and to say, how can I make what my predecessors have better? Because you don't have resources to just throw around. So I'm just being critical of him from that point of view. But also, I mean, you raise a number of issues there in terms of the education. That's what's going to drive us, If you're not going to make sure education is critical for your people, then you're not the visionary that you claim to be. And I know the criticism again, St. Lucia spends about anywhere between 8 to 10% of its GDP. Its budget, sorry, I should say. Its budget on education. Granted, about 90% of that money goes to do things like paying salaries and stuff like this. But for a small country, when I was minister, it's between 8 and 10% of your budget, because the budget of St. Lucia at $1.2 billion, and the Ministry of Education gets about somewhere in the vicinity of $126 million. Now that tells you that the government is actually spending a big chunk of what it has, because you can only spend what you have. At your home, what you do with your household is based on your income. And so when the government looks into its coffers and it looks and it says, it doesn't mean that it means it's enough, but it says, if you put in close to 10% of that budget into education, you're on the right track. What you really want to do is to make sure that you try to eliminate as much wastage as possible. Because there can be wastage. Yeah. Some people can misappropriate government funds. And I mean, we understand that. Not that we believe in it. We understand it happens, and we have to find a way of stemming it out. But I want to give successive governments some credit. I'll be honest with you. It's difficult in small island states with, as I said, our best resources, our people. But if you can spend between 8 to 10% on your people, you begin to see it multiplying gradually. Maybe by the time the next 10, 20 years would have moved along a lot better, and a prime minister will be in a position to maybe move it to 12, 15%, because not many countries in the world can say that they put that amount. And so another issue you raised, you said you didn't see the Ministry of Education in the youth economy.
Front and center, yes.
I don't think the youth economy has actually, it was launched because the Prime Minister wanted to somehow signal to the rest of the country that we want to do it. So the funding, part of the funding that will do the youth economy is there. So he got support from Taiwan, he got support from other funding agencies, so he began the process. But I think there's going to be a decent launch of the youth economy sometime in the new year, because by then you'd have had most of the mechanism in place, because I'm sure now what's happening in the background is you having a paper properly finalized, because the Labour Party would have looked at it in its manifesto, but a manifesto doesn't mean you have all the policies totally written up. And so now I'm sure that they're putting together what that looks like, because I also have questions about what exactly it will look like. I do have a good idea, but I think I'm more interested, as you are, in seeing what the educational component is. Because someone I would have suggested the Prime Minister, which I've spoken to him on a number of issues, we have countries like Taiwan still giving us multiple scholarships in a year. But how can we improve that by beginning to find other persons who can give us? I know we see Morocco giving us. The Cubans are in a hard time at the moment, so we have to understand. Venezuela was trying to assist us when I became minister by doubling up on the medical scholarships that we had, but Venezuela itself is in its own difficult place. The same people we're looking to, they are having difficulties, and some of our traditional friends may have closed their doors and they're helping other places and so on. So it is just about, sometimes in government, it's very easy when I'm out to see what the problems are, but I'm almost certain that all the time, most of the politicians, most of the public servants are actually working very hard to ensure that education stays front and center in our development.
Yeah, well, like you, will be monitoring the official launch and to see the direction it's going. Yeah. Because, I mean, all the issues that the youth economy is supposed to address has its roots in education.
Yes.
If you want to do business, whatever it is, even in the creative industries, everything has to go through the education system. That's in my opinion. So
I agree with you.
So I wanted to see more of Mr. Edward, the Honorable Minister, involved in this.
And even if he doesn't watch this one, I'll tell him so.
Yes.
He's my student. That's why I like to say it, from St. Mary's. So I would have to say, yes, people are interested in seeing the educational aspect.
All right. Now, Dr. Lewis, you mentioned Taiwan a while ago and agriculture. And again, that's part of the youth economy as well. Taiwan we have good relations with Taiwan at the moment. And Taiwan has two unique, a few unique strengths, but one is in agriculture.
Right.
And whereas we've had Taiwan do things here, but we're not seeing, and I'm looking at food security as independence now,
Right.
because our food import bill is still increasing. So that's not decreasing, even if we have Taiwan as a friend who is investing and who is helping us with agriculture. Talk to us about that aspect of it in terms of the need to focus more on, because COVID has exposed us. We need to be food secure, we need to be nutrition secure. Our food import bill keeps growing, and most of the stuff we import is unhealthy, whereas we grow locally healthy foods. Talk to us about the role. Is there a role for education in advancing agriculture, in ensuring that to gain independence, that we need to put agriculture front and center? Because currently we have tourism as a main pillar, and that's fine if you look at the numbers and so on, but are we ignoring and missing an opportunity here to become food secure by not having a bigger role for agriculture in education?
And I'll try very hard to see how I can put that particular section down. When you think about it, two countries I've visited that you see the role of education in agriculture. In that order, I first went to study in New Zealand. And those who are the farmers in New Zealand are the educated people. They have the capital, that means they have the land, they have the machinery, and they are the ones who do everything. So you see it front and center that New Zealand as a developed country, they're almost self-sufficient in terms of what they do. Of course, they have to trade with the rest of the world. But I really love that model. So I'm saying, but education, from what you see, is the key, the technology involved. And Taiwan is the next country that I've visited, and it is really about those who are educated and the resources are put in to agriculture. I was having that discussion with a working friend of mine. I'll say his name, Dr. Reed, Errol Reed. Dr. Reed served in Winban, and he's into agriculture. His doctoral work is into that field. And just yesterday we were sitting and we were talking, and he's agreeing that sometimes maybe the governments have not done enough. But we are considering also that, one, the first thing you need to have is the land. Who owns the land in the country? And that's why you saw very early on the Labour Party in 1980, and give him some credit, Peter Josie started talking about these issues about land banks and so on. So as we moved away from GIST industries and who owned the land in these countries, who had all the people, I mean, I don't want to go into the families who have all the lands in this country, that eventually the land would belong to those who are citizens of this country. Of course, those who have it, they are citizens, but more people will acquire land. So if you have the land, first of all, but we have one drawback, you must agree. One drawback is a lot of young people in their minds, the psychological thing is, no, the land and this food production thing is about slavery. And we've not made agriculture look like something that has moved to the 21st century, where young people see there is machinery and there's technology to take care of some of the things that they see going back to slavery. So that's why I say I want to make sure I get a good hold on this. But you're right. We have not reached that point where we make agriculture really look like something that, well, it should be, at this point in the 21st century, that all the technology that you can think about, because you have machines that can dig these holes, but the banana fields, you have a lot of equipment. You see what the Taiwanese are doing in this country for us, assisting us with the greenhouses and with all the sort of things to increase our production. And I'm actually, for example, the amount of watermelon that we produce. But you must also now have different parts of the economy prepared to take in that also, because if you produce all of that watermelon and all of that cucumber and all of that, and you don't have the places for them to be sold, the farmers do not feel that they can sell them. Then, because even at one point we probably close, I heard with all the buzz about honey, and I have become a honey enthusiast, we're probably close to self-sufficiency also. But you must have a market. And our people sometimes must learn, as you say, for education, to eat a lot of what we grow or what we ourselves produce. Because why would we want to buy honey from outside if we can produce? Now, but I'm not an expert, but I've come to understand some things that we have some of the best honeys produced in terms of which flower, the scent and so on. So the question is, yes, we probably need to sit down now, even for that same youth economy, and begin now to see, how do I make agriculture really a whole part of my education system? Not necessarily teaching agriculture, just teaching it, but getting people to be oriented to understand the importance of being self-sufficient, to be able to feed yourself. Because Safa began a very good, again, I tell you, a lot of things start well. Safa began very well with that farm in the Mabuya Valley, where they took their students. But it has not grown. It's just become like an abandoned stuff. And I don't want to hit them, but the point is, we begin things well, but we don't continue. And sometimes we blame, all of us, sometimes we blame government. And we say, what's government? Government is not just the prime minister, the ministers. Government is us. We are the ones. Yeah, there are persons who are going to be leading out. But when they put in policy, we who have been given that responsibility must make sure we carry it through. Because as a teacher, I understood that very well. My responsibility when I got educated as a math teacher was to come back into the system, serve the system by going to class, teaching the young people the mathematics that I needed to teach them, because that's what the governors in Lucia had sent me to school for. And so some people are not taking their responsibilities serious enough. And we have to tell ourselves, if we want to say we're independent, part of that independence means we have to take our responsibilities seriously. Whatever we do, we mop the floor, we take it seriously. We are the ones who serving as prime minister or ministers, we take it seriously. Anything you do in the economy is important. All of them are important. So I understand that, and I just think for our system must begin now from very early to begin to have a sense of responsibility. I think I was looking at, when I was a student in New Zealand, I spent time going around the schools, and it is a sense of independence in their heads. You have to do that for education. We've not done that well enough, quite honestly. We have to take some of the beating. We have to remember our schools. Schools start, and what do our students know about their country sometimes? Do we inculcate the sense of independence, like singing the national anthem, understanding who the leaders were before, what are the virtues, what's the motto of St. Lucia? Sometimes I'm sure you might ask somebody, what's the motto? They might not know what it is. So yes, we might have to take responsibility for some things. And all of us, I serve as minister, I take some responsibility because we have to begin to do it and continue to do it. Sometimes we start something and we drop it along the way.
And I think part of the issue too is integration, because we seem to have subjects as silos. So you do math and you're not connected to anything else, or if you do theater, you're not doing business. But whereas a business student can help a theater student develop a business plan for a play.
Well, I think that's what the SBA, the whole SBA, which is a very innovative part of the curriculum, that CXC, one of the very first examination bodies, began to realize the SBA can integrate all this, and you're right. So, and a teacher shouldn't just be teaching. I never thought math from a perspective that it just was a subject to be, just so you know how to factorize a quadratic equation. But there was more to understanding that when you tell somebody they know math, you know more mathematics than you really think you do. Because every time you think, there's a mathematical thought. You are thinking about, you get up in the morning and as soon as you get up, you begin to negotiate direction. It's mathematics. So I tell students these things. You begin now to say, what am I going to have for breakfast? How much am I going to have? No, I had this yesterday. I can't have the same quantity. I'm watching my diet. I'm watching my weight. You see, every subject you teach, you have to see, as you say, the integration of it to the person's education. Because it's no longer just say you're doing biology and then that's it. No, how does the business component come into that? So I think CXC give them that. We just have to keep moving on, because it's just getting to the point where our students are beginning to see how that integration you're talking about is useful. So they carry on SBA and they realize, oh, I never thought about it that way. I saw something, I think it's from Castro's Comprehensive. Students are doing the SBAs and the child is coming on with some new cookies and so on to package it properly and so on out of the SBA And here's an industry that can grow. So as I begin to look throughout our schools, sometimes we see glimmers of this, of some of the things that can come out. But for somebody to say, how can I help that child push that idea a little further? And that's where probably the entrepreneurial aspect comes. And we might just see that under the youth economy. How can we propel these young people to further things? Because think about it. You in particular, I mean, you and I had some discussion just before this. And I see you as an entrepreneur because what I see, the way I see Bernard, you've gone through life. I saw you as a musician first when I was a student because you're about the same age of me. And then I'm looking now, Bernard is his own person doing all these things into broadcasting and technology and so on. I see how you've moved. You didn't stay one place because you know how to incorporate all these various things. So I'm just saying somebody needs to be able to tap it and bring it all together.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe you should be thinking about how you're going to be part of that whole drive in the youth economy yourself.
Well, most definitely, we're thinking about it for sure. Because,
Okay.
but we're couching it in the terms of independence.
All right.
Because we want the youth to be owners
Right.
of businesses in St. Lucia. And we want them to be drivers. They will certainly be leading the country in 10, 20 years' time in terms of people who are part of the NYC and so on. These are where our leaders are coming from the schools and so on. And so that's why we're focusing a bit on education.
Right.
And especially empowering youth who are underprivileged, who come from areas that are neglected and they don't seem to have much hope. And you've seen
Right, because they need to see role models. That's another
Right.
issue.
Yes.
If young people don't see role models from their communities, and that's why young people, they look to you, and I'm very serious about this. They look to people like you. They see Bernard, Fanis, and Randall. They see you all in the media. And if you all can do it, they figure, okay, how am I going to come and make it better? Because they're not just thinking, I'm seeing CBS and ABC and all these international broadcasting corporations. They want to see local. So in anything, whether it is the dentist, the medical doctor, the engineer, and I'm sorry that I'm using only professional positions, but there are a lot of positions, whether it's the artists, they need to see. I mean, the guys from Puasho, what's his name? Monster, and the other one, he'll not be happy I was parliamentary rep. The one who is very much big time, Ricky T.
Yes.
They need to see persons in their own neighborhoods become.
Right.
And then they say, I can do it too. And that's what life is about. We look for inspiration from within.
And that's why it's disappointing to me a little bit, Doc, that we don't have music as a more structured program in schools because there's possibilities there. And obviously music leads to other areas, theater, film, and so on. Right. So as part of the education reform, that's what some of the discussion we're going to have.
Well, and the reason for that, there's a lot of music in schools, but what you want to see, and I'm agreeing with you, what you want to see is that there's a center of excellence for music. One of the things that I was trying to do with a school like George Charles when I was Minister for Education was to say, why doesn't George Charles think about, because they had a lot of students who were into the arts, so excellence in the arts, and they had students who were good in dancing, good in music, and then they had a then principal who was the Calypso monarch, Wally. So there they had the opportunity to make their school the center of excellence for that particular field. Because everybody thinks they want the same model. So everybody wants to be a St. Mary's College, everybody wants to be... St. Mary's College are their own schools. They always champion their own school. If you listen to St. Mary's, and I'm not taking it from because I'm an old boy. St. Mary's College always says what they want to do. And they tell you that they're the best in everything. SJC does the same thing. Hess does it. So why can't all our schools, Corinth, and I'm going back to George Charles, they have that talent. I was telling them then, and I'm not going to mention who I was talking to, why don't you really push that idea of being excellent in the field of arts? You're going to really see your school will become a school of choice. And now I'm using, I don't want him to see that, Mr. Fellinot of Babonneau, that's his phrase, that Babonneau will become a school of choice. And when I became minister, I always told Terry, because he went to Teachers College with me, I always said, that's an excellent phrase, making your school a school of choice. And so you're right. We needed to say, take this a little further. Don't just say you're teaching music with the scales and so on in school. But you take it and you make an industry out of it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the right word, industry, because there's so many different things
Yes.
that it impacts. Now, time is running out on us,
Yep.
Doc. There's a few things I wanted to speak to you about land and so on, but we'll have to probably leave that further the show. But I wanted to get back to something that we were discussing earlier on in terms of constitutional reform and the discussion that we had in Parliament. Doc, and when we were discussing it in Parliament, when the report was being discussed, I tuned in as a St. Lucian, and the two people I wanted to hear the most was yourself and I think Dr. Rigobert.
Okay.
Who was there?
She was there.
Right, because they were youthful people and people that I knew and I could connect with and so on, and I wanted to hear. Now, I got a sense from listening to it and the tone of the debate, it was like a we versus them kind of thing. Yeah. Am I incorrect in getting that feeling?
Well, sometimes I think we don't see the bigger picture, and I know that. In the last 5 years, I've actually looked back and say, but sometimes we don't see the bigger picture. We're always fighting something that we ought not to be fighting. So I have not listened to myself, so I don't know where exactly you were hearing. Can't remember. But you're right.
It's in the Hansard.
I'm sure it's there. But I'm just saying, and I'm agreeing with you. So I will never absolve myself to say that I didn't help be part of it sometimes. We had to, because I believe that, I'm sure I said we ought to have some of the reform.
Yeah. There were quite a number of things that you were for.
So what I'm saying is, what we had to do was, I think before we came to Parliament, quite honestly, to the general public, among ourselves as parliamentarians, we should have had a discussion, our own internal debates, to say, what are the things we want to tell the country? The country must have a debate, yes. But sometimes we come to the country for debate, and it's sometimes, it's grandstand for some people. They really believe that I need to show who's better educated, who has the better argument. But and it's not only a St. Lucian thing, It's just a human. It's something about humanity. We sometimes lose track of what exactly we're doing. So I agree with you. There probably should have been because you cannot really do all the things the report said at once. But we could have said in the first 2 years, so 2015, because I think that's when the debate was, 2015. 2015 to 2020, we want to make sure that we can achieve these 5 objectives. Let's say this is it. Because one of the things I think the report said was that there was a lot of power in the role of the Prime Minister. I mean, this whole idea of the Prime Minister, like happened in Barbados just a few days, just come up and tell us when the election. You notice how the British have changed it slightly. Even if you call us election, there must be a parliamentary debate that gives it the majority to say, yes, it can happen. There's need for reform. Because if we're going to move on, we can't take necessarily the same constitutional arrangements that were given to us in 1978. Remember, that's 1978 again, that's 43 years ago. The British they gave almost all countries almost the same blueprint, slight changes. But our people ought to get to a point where they decide, how do we want to govern ourselves? And that is what's important. The Constitution is, how do we govern ourselves? And that's why I say government is us. Now, and this is a long discussion, Bernard.
I know.
Now, here is what we were saying. What are the things that are going to be central? I think, for example, I think really now, there's no need for us to be our last court of resort, to be the Privy Council. We have the CCJ. I mean, it's unfortunate, it's just about 4 countries that are making it this last case. So I'm saying, these are the constitutional reform. And I don't know, Bernard, I'll be honest with you, I don't know that we necessarily need a referendum. I'm not saying that's what our constitution makes now. Although I think the law people tell me that the idea that there seemed to be, CARICOM gave some kind of an understanding that maybe we can move on with the CCJ without necessarily going through a referendum. Personally, these are the kind of things we need to do, because clearly that's part of our constitution. Who governs us? How do we govern ourselves? Barbados, I mean, we take Barbados now. Barbados has become a republic. But in the minds of a lot of people, they don't understand, a lot of us, and even those of us who think we know, we don't understand the full merit of it. Because you have to understand that when you become a republic like Barbados is, you're saying that total governance is in our hands. Because what you find was happening in the pre-independence debate with St. Lucia, between St. Lucia and the UK. And in St. Lucia, it was between the government and the opposition, St. Lucia Labour Party. Then, it's to decide what's going to be in that constitution. What do we want? And, you know, we're fighting, while the British is trying to offload us, we are fighting. So I think we have had to have a discussion among parliamentarians and have a debate also, and then come back. So I think the Prime Minister, I don't know exactly where he is, but I'm sure you've heard him say he wants to have a look at that constitutional reform. And I know Philip J. Pierre, the man that he is, he will at least look to see what exactly we can do. Because clearly, all the items that were given to us in 1978, some of them, and we can do some things, Bernard, without necessarily doing constitutional reform,
right,
in the sense that you have to change the constitution. This idea of, let's take two examples. The idea of having a deputy speaker and he cannot be a minister. Well, that's fine.
Right.
Well, get rid of the idea that a deputy speaker has to be among the chosen members, because the Speaker of the House is not among those who were elected. So you can get rid of it. And so the problem that young Jeremiah Norbert has, which he thinks probably some people believe, he didn't get a ministerial appointment, you can get rid of it by saying, then you can bring somebody from outside to be a deputy speaker. And that doesn't need constitutional reform. It just needs changing of the standing orders of the House. And you can have issues like, for example, why every parliamentarian doesn't have an allocation from the budget given to Parliament, the same way we put an allocation for the housing needs, each parliamentarian. We have a salary allocation. So we can make an allocation. Let's say we start with $1 million. And each parliamentarian will know that through the budgeting process, constitutionally he has access to that money. And we can do these things. You don't need to go and change any law. There's certain basic things we can do. But again, it's because human beings are naturally selfish. That's how we are. We are naturally selfish. We want to keep our opponents away from, and I don't believe in it. I'll be honest with you, I don't believe in it. I don't know that because you give somebody access to $1 million that they will necessarily win the seat. Because I may have $5 million and you, Bernard, can just have 2 million, and then you use your money a lot wiser than I do. So I'm just saying, the constitutional reform is important. And I have read that document. I've not read everything, but the most salient parts of it, I am telling you, I'm sure we can come around to finding common ground as politicians, because everybody comes into politics, whether we think about it or not.
Because I heard the Prime Minister mentioned that that's one of the things that they normally do. Mention it and then shy away from it, and it doesn't get...
and that's where you're all in the press.
Right, so that's what we're supposed to come in and so on. And because like I was telling you, I thought the tone I got was that the politicians were being very defensive. They saw it as the commissioners and the general public as them, and it was almost like they were fighting for the political survival, and it was, to me, it was a wrong signal to send to St. Lucians.
You know why? Because what happened is, the governing party, when it looks inside the arrangements, the constitutional arrangements, it sees them on the power it has. And that's what all parties do. They want to be in government. So they look and they say, why, if I give up some of these powers, I really, that doesn't do me good. So you're right. And again, it's back to the human thing. So, but we can go about.
But we do have the discussion. Not everything that was suggested, because you collect the views of everybody, and then you decide what's in the best interest of the country and move on. But what I said as a young St. Lucian, looking at the debate, I didn't like was the tone and the fact that it was suggested that, you leave politics to politicians, and then you figure out, telling St. Lucians who've been dedicating their lives to the country and the development, that they still don't have a say.
Right.
I thought
I can understand that, because, again, I have come to understand government even better outside of government. One of the things I did outside in the last 5 years, I went to teach for the international school. And one of the things they did for me that helped me was to give me to teach a course called Canadian Law and Political Science. These two courses. What I did, I really spent time, having gone through the experience myself and reading how the Canadians agreed to govern themselves, I realized that, look, you can really, it's the people who decide how they want to govern. You're just going to put it in words, in law, and the people. Because all we are as politicians is the servants of the people. And that's why I'm happy Philippe Juppé used that phrase, servant leadership. Because servant leadership is the best way to govern. Because you don't know everything, and you are not the only one who have ideas. So I agree with you, and I hope I'm going to commend the Labour Party to encourage them, and the Prime Minister, who I know will do that, to say, tap into people like yourself and others who want to see this reform project go forward, because I believe that's the way forward. Young St. Lucians are calling upon us as politicians, and I say us because I'm still in the politics in a way that I have my own contribution to make.
Right.
So I believe that we need to find what people are saying and how can we improve their lives.
Right. So it's a discussion we'll be having, Dr. Lewis, as we head towards the 43rd and the 50th and the 60th anniversary, because I'm envisioning 50 and 60 and trying to see what kind of solution are we building now. Are we doing a course correction now to make sure that by the time we get the 50th anniversary, that we are heading there finally towards independence and so on. I'm sure we'll have many opportunities to speak with you again.
And I wanted to say something before we end. When you look at the institutions we have, Bernard, let's look at public service, for example. You have to give credit to St. Lucians and how we've built in 42 years. I mean, we've had governments, different administrations from 79. The little blimp between 79 and 82, where you had internal, because the country, whatever people think, when you look at it for, again, very critical lens, the country never really went that. It was the internal thing was the Labour Party had its own problems, but the Constitution was clear about how things would happen, that you realize that even when they went back to elections, that the politicians accepted the results. And so while we had a blimp, we had some terrible times with different personalities between 79 and 82. But you have to think about our institutions. How did the electoral system fare during that time? How did public servants comport themselves? How did our schools run during that time? Everything you can see that the institutions, we have a solid country in the sense that a solid foundation has been laid. And all we have to do is make these institutions work better so we ourselves can get better and we can have success for them. Because whether you want to think about it or not, the public service in St. Lucia can match the public services almost everywhere. That's why I hate to hear people say sometimes education has failed us. No, it has not. I believe we can do better. But I must tell you, I look at our institutions and I just want to say I am very happy to see how those who handle these institutions can see that they are living up to the constitutional requirements in these institutions, whether it's the public service. Of course, there's always going to be the partisan issue. But by and large, we've had a stable, look at some of our friends around us, the turmoil we can see. But we've had a region that has had principally some good aspects of governance from the point of view we let the Constitution work.
Dr. Riss, thanks for your time. I'd like to wish you all the best for 2022.
Yes.
And look forward to having further conversations with you, whether it be through Zoom or in person.
I like that one.
But certainly all the best for 2022, and we will certainly tap on your resource, your experience and so on to guide us as we navigate our discussion on what independence means in St. Lucia. So we'll certainly be reaching out to you again. Appreciate it, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Bernard, and I want to wish you well with that project, because I really want to continue that discussion with you, because to me, for posterity, this is what our young people need to see, to get a glimpse of the history of St. Lucia from different generations, because I've had the opportunity to sit down with a lot of older politicians to find out what exactly transpired before my time. So thanks again.
Appreciate it.